Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night. Today's Dharma talk is titled Forms, Standards, and Rules. Forms. Tree is a form. Human being is a form. Forms, standards. Standards are something that human beings set up to perhaps guide, but mainly to control. And rules are kind of more of the same, just an elaboration on the standard. These are the rules. And the situations that in which these are sanely applicable. And when I say sanity, I'm talking about some kind of communication, cooperation, collaboration that evolves into a natural hierarchy that is basically sane, basically not at war with anything. And you've heard me say many times that it is about the way we do it here is about observing these forms, these standards, these rules. It is not about obeying them. This doesn't mean that you might not be functioning in a way that may seem to you like you're obeying it, or may seem like someone else that you're obeying it. Sometimes people want to appear like they're obeying when they're observing. Sometimes people want to appear like they're observing when they're actually obeying. This is for your consciousness to discern. This is for your consciousness to understand deeply the nature of the rules, of the forms, of the standards relative to the consciousness in this situation that is in the area of identity, where most of the world is completely trapped by their beliefs, their opinions, and propelled by hope and fear, passion, aggression, and ignorance. I'm not telling you anything new if you've been studying this for a while. The whole idea of correct, incorrect is that there is a correct, there is an incorrect, is the misunderstanding. And that is, they might be afraid initially. They might be afraid between the ages of 4 and 5. And then that goes away because it gets pushed down. I don't want to be afraid, so I'm going to use that other end of the 3 poisons, aggression, to cover that up. And that aggression over time can start out when you're really young. Depends on what interaction you have with your parents, and with your society, with your culture, with your school, with how those forms are used, and if those forms are used intelligently. What do I mean by that? Communication, cooperation, collaboration. You can't have the last 2 without the first one. You've got to have a lot of communication, and most of that communication, to bring it into a easier way to describe it, is about receiving. Not only receiving, not only listening, that's one, but also just look at what's in motion. This is what this training is about. If you haven't caught on to this yet, it's about watching what moves so you can understand it with your wisdom mind, you could say, which is an actual form of this understanding. Excuse me. Rather than just some kind of adherence to some kind of law and order or rule situation. The primitive aspect, primitive, I'm talking about not bad, just a lower level, more kind of a childish form of imputing some kind of hierarchy. Theistic religions and so on tend to rely on a hierarchy. Our tradition relies on that in different ways, depending on the teaching person, depending on the lineage, depending on the school, depending on the order, depending. These need to be observed and not obeyed. And so this shows up different ways. One of the ways it shows up, say, in the monastery, we have forms there. We have the people who fill certain positions or forms, like the doan or the timekeeper. In Tibetan, this is the umze. And in our case, the Sokuzan and other forms also are observed, or you could say practiced, then you need to be corrected. And this whole area is not consistent in the way that we like to see forms or rules or laws or standards. I don't know what to do, and I like to say, just do whatever you want. Do whatever you want, and let the forms show you, rather than have someone give instruction. If someone comes to the monastery, which is not a hierarchical form, this does not help mind misunderstand, and that's very possible. You misunderstand a lot of things. But the way it looks here is it looks like we need to observe the forms. That means here's the form, here's the doan, he or she or they, because they're or taught. I've had people before, and without even practicing, let go of their self-centeredness for even put it aside for 10 minutes. Tell you that they just want to learn. They're just here to learn. Sometimes. So, but the form, say, I'll give you a real tiny example. I'm a monk, or sometimes people who are not fully ordained, but just have the experience, maybe teaching someone the doshi position or the doan position. And sometimes those are regular from the point of view of teaching them, and irregular. These are dull because when you go in and do it, which we don't require that of people unless they're ordained. So it's about observing the form. So you can't really understand what is happening. And if they're trying to go out, trying to change the form because they think the form would be better if we did it this way. We need to cross this out. This here is this here, and this is extra. Or this doesn't work right. I'm inventing a few things because I'm not remembering exactly what occurs. So it's difficult to be taught. It's difficult to receive because we want a credential as quick as possible. We want to make sure we're doing it right. So the form is meant to help our awareness. It's not meant to control or contain us. This is the rest of the world is functioning in not only spiritual materialism, but also in just materialism, cultural, the belief in your existence materialism, that you have to do this, you have to succeed, you have to get a job, your football team to win. Does that because the need to have control so that we don't have any open-ended situations like the one that you find when you face the wall. When you first face the wall, your mind will fill it up with things because you don't want to see the open dimension that is there. The ego mind will continue to crank up stuff. And this is why I don't teach the form of tightening down on the movement of the breath, the form of labeling thinking so you can slowly move what we call the awareness away from the confusion of the eight consciousnesses. We can see, with the support and help of the forms, we can see more clearly the way in which we are deceiving ourselves, the way in which we are grasping at a self and rejecting another, or grasping at another and rejecting ourselves. Judgment, 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 evaluation, conclusion, evaluation, conclusion. This is happening with, I want to say lightning speed. I might as well say lightning bugs. So again, observing the form. You can take this outside the monastery, outside of your meditation room or your shrine room or zendo or what have you, your bedroom, and into when you reach for your toothbrush. Look at the form. Observe the form. There's no right way to pick up a toothbrush, but you could be aware of the form. Aware of when you're going through a doorway, if there's a change in the way you do that, in a way in which you're and then look Look at the way you're adding anything to that, judging that. Do it with your own mind, and then it's much easier to do it with others. We notice how every time we look at anybody, anytime you look at me, you're judging me. I know this. I'm old. I've been around a long time. And we're always judging. It is not about shutting that down, correcting it, changing it, or stopping it. It is about just be aware of it. Find out who you are. Who you are is not separate from anyone, anywhere, from me, from anyone else, from anyone else. This is the traditional word for this is wisdom. And I think even that is, you can't describe what this is. But you can realize it. You can slowly over time through your practice begin to back away from covering up your true nature. And the forms will help you. But you need to bring your intelligence to the form, not the feeble part of your mind that thinks we need to obey, or we need to be right, we need to be corrected. Sometimes I have watched people do a form that I've actually taught. I've taught them the form and watched them, observe them, not because I'm such a wonderful guy, but I'm very interested in awareness. I'm not really, I say not because I'm such a wonderful guy, it's because I'm really interested in the way awareness, particular person, including this old man. So very interested in how that the first link in the chain of existence, which is avidya, into formations. Observe that. Use the forms. Enjoy. You could say enjoy the forms. Enjoy the way the structure never will support your self-centeredness if you're actually practicing through observing, through awareness, through perception only. You're never going to have a concrete conclusion of, oh, I'm no longer believing in a self. I'm no longer believing in another. Now I'm just perception only. Not going to happen. It's not a happening. It's not an occurrence. You can't have an occurrence because that's otherness. So how you set up your particular form or rule about yourself is different. And if you've talked to me very much, you see that I try to do this with you. If you even talk to me, some people I see, but they never interact with me. I have no idea what they're doing with their sitting practice, and they will not ask me. And is that wrong? Hell no, that's not wrong. People should do what they need to do. That's why almost everybody that comes to me as a student has a strong streak of, shall we call it, rebellion. I don't have any followers. People that are followers don't want to follow me. They want to go somewhere where there's a conventional, it's predictable. They know what's going to happen. They know the form. The form is always the same. You know what I'm saying? But you, in your situation, can look at your form, and then you can maybe practice really intently for 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years. And then maybe you'll interact with me, maybe you won't. That's up to you. I trust if you're on this path, I didn't get you on this path. Your karma, the first of the 4 reminders. You're free and well favored. You're free. You're not so locked up in your belief in this and your warfare about that you can't give this some consideration, have some curiosity about the path of meditation. And you're free and you're well favored in that you're not so clogged up with your ideas about Buddhism or your ideas about anything that you couldn't listen to somebody and consider what's being said, even though it might not align with other people. Like one of my newer students recently said when talking to someone else, asked Sokuzan, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't know what they actually said. He said, well, some people love him and some people hate him. So I can't get a greater compliment than that. Not that I need compliments, but I also don't crave no compliments. So you can compliment me if you want. You're just complimenting yourself anyway. So forms, I'm happy to have discussion about this. I'm also just as content to continue to talk about the structure that we need. We need to form, but consciousness needs to be liberated on some level, on every level, on the simplest level. Wherever you're ready to start, start now. Pick up a spoon without about looking at what you're doing, observing, receive what you're doing. Do not call it a spoon. Do not call it anything. Slowly, it's basically a minimalist approach to everything. Less, less, less. You're not going to find and see or understand emptiness if you keep adding your ideas to what it is. Whatever, you can't figure out emptiness. When I say you can't, don't believe a word I say. Go figure it out. Come back and see me in 10 years. Or not. Or go do something else. Or maybe you'll succeed. Maybe you'll write a great book called The Final Understanding of Emptiness by Paul Glickman. Or maybe you should change your name to the name of a city or something like Verona or Sebastopol. That would be really impressive to have that there. They would know that your name is like mine, Pop Brown. I remember when I was very young, I was very embarrassed that my name was so simple. I mean, when I was very young, I'm like 6. Even then, I thought, a lot of people with this name. How am I going to find out who I am if there's other people that have the same name? Very threatening, very, very threatening for me. So awareness finds its own form, but it's not going to find that form unless there first is some kind of form so that we can train ourselves. We need to, this is why we have this the structure of the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, the teaching person, what is being taught fundamentally, and the community. And so this goes back probably further in other ways and that form shows up in other ways, but it's a very strong structure. And it seems to be very helpful. It certainly has helped me. The most uncomfortable part of the 3 for a short period of time is the teaching person. That was very difficult. But the long haul there was the Sangha. It's very painful to work with people who don't agree with you or think something else and have the intelligence to show why you're incorrect because they understand more clearly than you do. Sangha. But it's a form that does what? It's not about agreeing with the Sangha or fighting with the Sangha or doing anything with Sangha, but the world is going to show up as a Sangha. You as a practitioner can't meet someone in Sumatra or Borneo or Tanambogo Gavutu. You can't meet them, but there's a person there who, if you met them, would help you train your mind just by being in relationship with them. This is what the Sangha is about. The Sangha presents you with a dozen or two, maybe a few dozen people who are coming at the Dharma from completely different areas and with different structures, different ways of being confused about this world, and also have in common the inspiration to be sane and to see that the Buddha's the teaching was very sane and that he was not fighting with anything. He was not even promoting anything particularly. So here we have, you have a situation where you're going to find people in the Sangha that are not going to be easy for you to get along with, perhaps. And you can handle it several ways. You can join, become ordained, and come right in and just douse yourself in that negativity, which is the Sangha. I'm not making this up. Even Koban, when asked if he could say what the Sangha is, he said it's a garbage pit. And this is a Japanese monk said this. So forms. Chisho, you have a question? Do we have a... Oh. I didn't hear you because the speaker wasn't up. Please repeat.
You said just now that awareness will find its form, or is it awareness will find its own form?
Yes.
What does that find mean? What is it finding? What does that find exactly mean?
The finding means that because awareness is not looking for anything, that it is just an open dimension, when dependent origination brings about oppositions or forms that are either could be apparently in conflict or apparently in agreement or apparently very similar, that the awareness, which is not a person, actually understands that form and includes that form. And so but it includes the form not out of differentiation and desire and wish for this and wish for that and separation, but it includes that form. It includes even the apparent conflict. And this is a phrase I've been using lately, and this is the first tenet of the Order of Immediate Light. And I'm happy to have you ask questions about it. The other three will come later.
So when awareness finds that form, then does it get stored up and doesn't it come back?
It may do, Chisho, it may do anything, because the only thing is the awareness, which is so open. You could also say that forms show up in an open dimension. If one's practice eventually, this is what the training is about. Sit down, hold still, and just watch the forms come and go. That you impute or think are your thought pattern. You actually think you're thinking. You are not thinking. There's no identity that is solid. Dependent origination is happening as a parent identity called Chisho or Maria or Unse, as that. And then we believe that. We buy into that because we are backed up by the body-mind complex that has a heartbeat, is hungry, wants to go outside, wants to get more vitamin D. I mean, all of the different elaborations on the individual. You don't have to get rid of the body. You don't have to starve the body as they did in ancient times. We don't have to go through it that way. It's just awareness. So you may operate, the illusion is that we need to get rid of the ego, and rather than see it's dependently arisen and it's unreal. And there isn't anything that arises that is not unreal, or shunyata, empty of our ideas about it. And it is incredibly powerful as a magic spell, as those in the past times who have understood this have used those kind of images or similes. It's a magic spell. It's like a bolt of lightning. It's like a dewdrop. It's just an astonishing realization that where whatever is left of you as consciousness is completely fearless and completely confident, and has no particular information about anything. But yet, if anything shows up, then consciousness, which is manifesting as a human being, actually finds the form of, in this case, the teacher and the student. As I've said before, if I have no students, I can't teach. I'm not a teacher. I don't have the identity of a teacher unless I'm talking to someone who is giving me the identity as a student. This is why it's so important. If you want this teacher to be here, this is why we do in ancient times. You supplicate the teacher. I don't need your supplication. I don't need anything, but you may need it. It's up to you. And in Chisho, in your country, which is where the Buddha, as far as we know, was born, a strong emphasis on the teacher-student relationship. Here, this is not supported in this country at all. That just opens the gate for charlatanism, and there's a lot of it because people come in and take advantage because the Westerners like that. They kind of like that romantic idea of having a guru, rather than understanding that the true understanding there is not having someone higher than you, but having someone who can point out the nature of your mind as quickly as possible in your particular swamp of karma. So awareness finding its own form there isn't somebody finding it. It's awareness. These hands are moving. This mouth is chattering. But there's no solid being here. I'm not saying I'm not here. There's the same person that's always been here, but it's unreal. So therefore, there's nothing to defend, nothing to promote, And I just like before I come in here, I'm, maybe 10 minutes before I got in here or less, I decided what I was going to talk about. And I have no plan. And the ego part of the mind, which is still functioning and it's unreal, is worried about that, because the ego part of the mind, which is unreal, but it's still there. It's like I've said before, it's like a clown sitting in your roof. It puts in its 2 cents worth, but it's a clown on the roof. So you listen, but if there was a clown on the roof of your house yelling at you about stuff, you'd probably listen. But you'd also notice it's a clown, and you also notice that it is a fabrication and it is unreal. Questions about that? Questions about that are good if you have more.
Thank you. If I do, I'll come up later.
Certainly.
She's
on bowing. I
Yeah.
had 2 questions.
Certainly.
And coming back to the idea of forms, I was wondering, how do we keep a sense of humor, or what is a sense of humor?
So a sense of humor is a fundamental understanding. I'm not talking about relative humor, about when somebody makes fun of somebody or at somebody's expense. I'm not talking about jokes, even though they're interesting, because they tend to show you that the way jokes work is you think something's going to happen, and then the person who is telling you the joke then moves that out of the way, and then your thinking mind collapses into space. So then there's a temporary feeling of spaciousness, like, oh, I didn't see that coming. Oh, I didn't see that coming. Space. So the humor is anupadika. I'm not always sure if I say that name right, but I'm trying to remember it because it's unproduced. It's talking about unproduced, the humor that is always the case, that the patience that is always not already patient. Nothing is even, you're not even waiting for anything, but you already have that sense of presence or authentic presence that doesn't need to go anywhere, doesn't need to get anything. As Kabir said in the 15th century, the fish in the sea is not thirsty. You have to see this is what you're looking for. This is the water. Fish in the sea is not thirsty. And so the sense of humor would be always there and available, even if something triggers you where you're angry and you have some anger come up there, because of the nature of mind training and the nature of your understanding as it, you could say, gets deeper on some kind of relative level, but actually approaches something that is ultimate, which is not a destination. You begin to lighten up a little bit. Even the word, sometimes teachers use the word enlightenment, just means lighten up. Lighten up. No craving for anything. Even though you have the craving, we try to get rid of the craving rather than see that the craver is empty of what is imputed by craving or grasping or wanting or having an agenda. So this is why it seems to be so still, and see the utter non-existence of the self. It's just an astonishing thing. It's very ordinary. I'll start with my little finger. It's very ordinary. It's very ordinary. It's very ordinary. And it's very ordinary. And then it's also very ordinary.
Is unbowing. When we are struggling with the forms or trying to work with even coming to or staying in the forms, how can we work with that severity? And I guess that was kind of the contrast to sense of humor. What's the role of humor in that feeling of letting yourself down or not upholding the forms, bowing?
What? Paraphrase that.
She is unbowing.
Simple.
What is a sense of humor when we're still trying to understand what the forms are, bowing?
So to put it into, to characterize it, I would say it's knowing you never can do this right. And just, you can kind of, it's hard to see yourself because we usually we take ourselves so seriously, but sometimes we see it in somebody else who's trying really hard to get the form just right. and they don't really realize that, they have toilet paper sticking out from the back of their robe because they just left the bathroom. I mean, I'm not saying that has to be there, but I'm using it's that kind of a thing to see that. Look at this. What is this? What are these? Form is empty of anything we see or anything we conclude about it, and even the conclusion is arising in space. And so the conclusion, the humor, the lack of humor, the intense feeling of anger or distress about this, or lack of patience with that, or disturbance that we see in others that are giving us a hard time, or however you may see that, the sense of humor is you are no longer identified with the form, but you're not ignoring the form. You observe the form because the relative way of talking about it, you actually become the space in which things occur. You could also say you're always this. You've always been that. You shouldn't become anything. But that's difficult unless there's a lot of mind training going on. And the kind I teach is not the creation completion practices. There was a time, and there may be with some people who really need to do a lot of jacking things up and calming things down in order to get an idea what this is. I think all you need to do is look at it. If you just look at what is moving, this is mind training. And that may be in meditation, that takes on a very formal sit down, hold still, hold very symmetrical. It's very formal, and you need to observe that as closely as you can. Do not move unless you have a need to move, and then that's observing the form. You observe the form that needs to be shifted because your back is sore. Don't go the direction of the macho control cultures, whether it's Tibet or Japan or China. China was not quite as strict with that, but they were strict. And we're not strict. If you haven't noticed, you might not have been if you want to find out, go to another monastery. There's monasteries in the United States that will make you obey and mind, and you have to do dot your I's and cross your T's, and that's not an exaggeration. You have to do it their way. And you have to do it the way they do it at Sotoshu in Japan. And so having a sense of humor about that rather than getting angry or getting irritated, or we might get irritated and then have a sense of humor about that and notice how it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. And we're off and running on some kind of negativity, this or about that, about this person or about ourselves. Or it's just like six-way ping pong with no net. And, you can't even find your paddle. So it's just like things are happening so much and going this way and that way and this way. And when I say "anda," I'm thinking maybe something else will show up. So that's kind of my phrase filler. "Anda, anda, 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 anda," and into a cloud. And those are not different from each other. Those are phenomena, and they are the consciousness that is finding consciousness. There's no elseness to it. The hawk, the human being, the Buddha, is consciousness finding its own form. And amazingly, 2,500 years ago, we had someone who understood that, an individual, an apparent individual who understood that from the ground up. Manifestation was ready. But who's counting? And by the way, that's not humor, so you don't have to chuckle.
Oh, sorry. Go on, please. You go.
To me, it seems that forms can be repetitious and monotonous and not entertaining. And I'm wondering, are those qualities that are important in form?
Yes, your awareness of that, whatever the monotony or not entertaining, or that's also humorous. That is also humor, because we know nothing lasts. And if you do nothing with that, if you don't try to get rid of it, if you don't explain it, you don't accept it, and you don't ignore it, it tends to come apart, because anything that is showing up as something that you can name gets its longevity from struggle. So, but there's no one who's struggling. So the humor comes from, in that situation, comes from just watching the conclusions of what you just described. Those conclusions may or may not arise. It's not about not concluding so much. I mean, even though I might say that, don't conclude. But the reason I say that is to bring your awareness to the concluding part of the consciousness that seems to be kind of like a vampire. Just has to have the blood of that experience, has to have that experience. Every one of you, and I'm not accusing you of anything, but every one of you has some kind of dynamic going on of elseness, of this is, I can't do this anymore. I need more of this. I need less of that. Always picking and choosing, increasing the very nature of this world that we have been told through these teachings is not to. They're not saying some things are not to, and then of course there's other things that are still to. There's anything you can think of has a polarity to it that is not to. Life, death, Buddhas, sentient beings, awakening, delusion. Reflect on that. Awakening is not something else. Awakening is delusion, but there's no warfare anymore. There's a lot to be said about that I could probably say, but you will help me a lot if you ask questions about that or about anything. Ask me questions about Rumi.
Sokuzan, I don't think this was about Rumi directly, but early on in the talk, you began talking about the way that a young child might begin to relate to fear, and you had never finished what you were going to say.
Are you criticizing me?
Perhaps.
Was that fun? Was that fun? Speak.
It kind of halted.
I thought so. I noticed a little bit of halt there. So go on and help me with that. I tend to kind of trail off sometimes and lose track of. But yeah, you can bring me back to that, and I'd be happy to restore that particular line of commentary if I can.
But how do we cover up fear when we're a child or when we're really young?
I think it's very similar to what we're doing now, except it's maybe not as obvious. And it's going to show up differently for each person. I'm sure you could talk about your style and what you were fearful of. I know I was terrified when I was very young and had a lot of difficulty with those bigger people around me. A lot of difficulty with it. And so the downside is the difficulty, but the upside is perhaps without all that difficulty, if I'd had a lot of nurturing or something, but you can't replace something for something else. You notice how you could say, well, perhaps if I hadn't married her, but this doesn't work. It's an illusion to think that we're in control. It's quite an amazing one. And we're just kind of, that's why Shakespeare kind of had it down. We're all actors on a stage. But I would say whatever you did is still showing up now. You're probably doing something similar. It's probably been modified quite a bit by your training, your awareness training over the last few years, and also other kinds of training that you've immersed yourself in. So we tend to do it through, it's very simple. One of the three poisons, passion, aggression, and ignorance. The aggression is the anytime anything gets out of line or any difficult, we immediately get upset with it, or we throw lances and spears at it. And the other one is which also supports that same situation, which is passion. We immediately, any kind of feeling, we immediately attribute. We want to find out why we feel, rather than actually just feeling, just the feeling. We need to know why. So we don't have an awareness practice. So this practice that we're doing as a shikantaza is to, as the Tibetans say, gom, get used to it. A gom den is a get used to it seat. And so that's all this says. Sit down and get used to. And the way you get used to something is you slowly stop reacting to it. You stop having commentary. You just get used to it, and it just comes and goes and comes and goes. And then eventually you return to your original nature, as is said in the Zen tradition, which is not separate, which is wisdom. And that may happen while you're alive, and you may have to die for that to be understood or seen. So that way of covering it up could show up, I could talk about it a little bit more if you could ask specific questions. There's so many ways. They're innumerable. Those are the three, but then there's so many other so-called levels of consciousness that are operating there that are, it's just difficult to track it because it takes you on a journey that can be very circular. Like, for instance, going into psychotherapy. For one thing, it's going to cost you a lot of money, and they're going to treat your mind as if it operates in a certain way. So consciousness will always find its own form. So if you go in there, then you will find the form of psychotherapy. Just like if you go into the I Ching, you will find, consciousness will find the form of the I Ching, which somebody came up with 10,000 years ago. If you go into whether it's astrology or cyclic movement, you will, I spent many years studying that. Many years studying lots of things that I don't even mention. Handwriting analysis. I spent many, many years studying that. I still look at it, but I don't analyze. I don't analyze anything particularly unless my own causes and conditions or the way awareness is showing up or finding forms may show up as that. Just like occasionally I want to inspect goats, which I never did, but I feel like I probably could. If there were some goats, could look at them. So being a little silly, but go ahead with that. Go further into that. If you have specific questions about that, I would be happy to respond to them.
Shokubang, is there any way to go into the texture of something that you're covering up as you're covering it up?
I think that's probably the only way you can do it. You have to see the cover up. I guess you call it a challenge. There is it takes time, and it's not necessarily going to happen depending on the way in which your particular life is working with passion, aggression, and ignorance, or the cover up, or covering up your true nature, or covering up your basic sanity. If there's basic sanity, you're not at war with anything. I'm not saying that you don't get irritated by this or happy about that. The relative thing is still operating. You still eat, you still live, you still breathe, but there's no longer an agenda about anything. And so I would say in the situation you're talking about, it's a matter of continuing to practice, continue to use the structure of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Probably not the only way. There's probably lots of ways to do this, but this is the one we're using. It's been around for a long time. And I just, I'm in my 30 or 20, 40, 47th year of doing this. And the first 10 years, 15 years, 20 years were a lot of work of trying to stay in that particular structure and work with it as best I could, study as much as I could, relate to people in the Sangha that I did not care for, that I thought were crazy, and some were trying to control everything. It was just difficult. I kept thinking myself, isn't there a better Sangha than this? Can't I find a Sangha where everybody's kind of sane? Well, no, the very nature of the Sangha are people who are dealing with their neurosis, their difficulty, their challenges, their passion, aggression, ignorance, but want to do it in a way that is about realizing who they are. It's a spiritual path rather than a mundane path of just repairing everything and fixing everything and no longer being angry. And the ego mind still gets hooked on that. Even if you're fully ordained as a monk, as you are, and as a few other people are, we still get hooked on something's wrong, needs to be fixed. And it may be that something's wrong, needs to be fixed here. It may be something's wrong and something needs to be fixed out there. Not two. The two-ness of it keeps us trapped in our own blaming. And the two-ness of it keeps our trapped in our own blaming of maybe something else or someone else or a situation. It's just so magnetizing to think that something else is causing this. This is causing something else. It's a misunderstanding, and it's a difficult one because the whole world, our politics, our TVs, and our family. I'm sure you've noticed the more you practice, any of you, the more you practice, you might not feel too clear about your own. You might feel more crazy, but you'll be real clear about other people's insanity. Especially people who don't practice. They start to show up more and more vividly insane. People who are even presented maybe 5-10 years ago as being fairly reasonable, crazy. You can see they're spinning because you've been looking at your own spinning for months, years, or whatever it's been. In your case, years. And I would say, just keep looking. Just keep looking. It's like going up the side of a mountain, to use that metaphor. Well, anytime I talk to anybody, I can see right where they're at on the mountain. And it's not measurement. It's not like, 1 to 10. Well, there's a 9 right there. No, you could be anywhere. You can go back to the bottom of the mountain. I can talk to you down in the valley. We can hang out and have soda pop. And then on the next interview, I see that because you're having such anxiety, I can see you're right at the edge. You're right just before the peak. I'm just using these metaphors as a way of talking about it. There's no progress. There's only apparent progress. Pilgrim's progress, as they say. There's only apparent progress, but realization is not progress. It's not even a goal.
Something about reality. How can one learn forms without getting attached or putting so much emphasis on them, like the mindset of, if it isn't like this, it's wrong?
So that's a good question. Did everybody hear that pretty much? Yes. Okay. So find a true teacher. Find a sangha. Find a structure. But find a teaching person who just following forms. They're using forms, but they're the only roadmap they're going to have might be something like Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. The teacher, the teaching, the community. Very simple, because how that teaching shows up is going to be so different on the teacher. And some teachers are going to lock down on certain teachings and push away others. And some teachers are going to work with you in a way, like some teachers will even tell you to get ordained, tell you to receive jukai or become a monk. That I've met people in our lineage that have been told they should ordain or they should this. I don't correct anybody. I'm not going to come in and say, make fun of them. So you okay with that? Somebody telling you what to do? You said, well, I thought it probably was time. Not going to happen over here. When I say not going to happen, I'm not saying if you was Raphael, if you, Raphael, came and I saw you on Zoom and you had an interview with me, unless you change your name, you said, I want to receive jukai. I'm not saying that I wouldn't say, contact Unyo starts sewing rocks. Probably not. But I meet everybody where they're at. And I have met some people that are ready. I've met people who are ready to become monks and won't ask me. And so therefore I don't recommend it. And I'm not kidding you. I've met people, the very best thing for them to do is, from the way it looks, consciousness always finds its own form. So show up here in front of me and you might as well be nude. I don't mean that figuratively, of course. I mean it figuratively. When I say that, I'm not looking at anything. There's nothing, you can't cover anything up. But if that, even though I might see that, everything's mutual. So I meet you where you're at. You may not be ready. This may not be your, you might see that. It doesn't make me some kind of a wizard. It just means that I don't have much happening over here. So when you show up, I know who I am. You don't. If you did, you probably wouldn't be here listening to me or talking to me. So come back to Raphael's question. Just find and it doesn't. I'm not talking about me. I'm not promoting myself. So I have plenty of students, and I don't need any followers. As I often say, ha ha ha. I'm not going anywhere. So there's really, you're not gonna. If you follow me, you aren't gonna go anywhere. I'm always here. To find that.
Kevin Bowing,
Yes.
earlier you mentioned how certain hierarchies showed up in past cultures
Yes.
that are now, you didn't use this word, but kind of obsolete or don't particularly apply.
You mean like the Peloponnesian War?
Yeah, that's the one. I guess I'm thinking of like the macho hierarchies of past
Yes.
medieval.
Yes.
So then, what relative to that? What is natural hierarchy? What is a hierarchy that does not become obsolete?
Very good. You can take the example from a tree. It has roots. The roots never argue with the leaves. They just do their job. They just function. And you have the stalk of the tree and the bark and the limbs and the fruit possibly. So it's a natural hierarchy. It's and it's the different parts of that hierarchy function very differently from each other. Your body has a natural hierarchy that we could talk about that possibly, but also our situation here, like in my situation as a Dharma teacher, I did not decide to do this. I just stopped fighting with everything. That doesn't mean that I don't have a bad temper or that I don't feel gloomy sometimes, or I don't have emotions coming and going. I'll say that in this way. What I'm told, and I'm not obeying anyone. And there is no authority. This is a primitive idea, and it's been going on since human beings have been here. There needs to be a chief, and who gets there either through birthright or kings and queens and all of that kind of a thing that has to happen. And Trungpa Rinpoche was trying to do the same thing with his son. I'm not saying that was wrong. I'm not correcting anyone. I'm saying he was trying to do that, and rather than allow that to develop as it needed to. And so this doesn't mean he shouldn't have a successor, or he shouldn't, pick somebody that could be his successor, as he did with the Vajra Regent Ursel Tenzin, who passed away of AIDS, as some of you know. So the right and wrong situation it's hard to say how that control situation of Tibet, the 4 lineages where there's a strong right and wrong thing, especially some lineages are more right than others, at least from their point of view. And there's a healthiness to that in a way, but also it can, if you study Tibet back in 14th, 15th century, you see there's a lot of fighting going on between the monasteries, especially Gelugpa and the Jonang tradition. So I'm not trying to go back and study history, but I'm saying the natural hierarchy is in that first, or feels like, shouldn't we get a handle on this? Shouldn't we tighten up these forms so we feel more confident to go ahead? There is no ahead. If you think there's a head, then it becomes materialism. And that doesn't mean that I don't think about, well, let's see, if I die, what's going to happen to the monastery? Well, I do something in that regard, but also this situation will survive or it won't. Maybe it just will survive or it won't survive. It's like Nagarjuna has said in the greatest humor of Nagarjuna was, you may attain enlightenment and you may not. And I think that's outrageously funny. I mean, what? This is just got 2,000 years ago he was able to say that. You may attain enlightenment, you may not. And here's he's talking to people who are intensely practicing, more than likely. But I would say the same thing, not that I need him to help me. I would say, I don't know what's going to happen. You may not, but whatever the case, you should practice, because this is not your only time you've been here, nor have I. I've been here many, many times. Do I remember them? I don't need to remember them. Like I don't need to remember what I did on the 31st of January, 1958. I have a pretty good idea. I went to 11th grade, but I don't know what happened that morning or that afternoon. Was I still using Ipana, or had I switched to Colgate already? You see what I'm saying? It's just so flooded. It's the glomeruli and the kidneys. There's too many parts to be able to figure it out or keep track of it. The dependent origination and the cooperation and the natural hierarchy is doing fine. We just need to stop interfering with what is happening with our ideas, our grasping of this, and our rejection of that. Grasping, rejecting. This is the teaching of the Buddha. This is the teaching of all of the sages down through the centuries, regardless of their orientation. Even the theistic approaches have that also. More about that, Kevin? Natural hierarchy.
When you say you just do what you're told, assuming you don't mean unyo,
Sometimes.
Does that mean, is that another way of saying meeting things where they're at?
Yes, it's situational, and just like so when I say I'm told, it's not. There's no one telling me anything. It's just I don't do much, but what I do comes out of the situation that I'm in, and sometimes I'm a little perplexed why I don't know what to do, because it looks like I should know what to do, because everything is laying out there. But then something changes about. It could be about the situation. It could be about a particular person, especially a close student that I'm involved with, that I'm observing to see where they're at with their whole dynamic, how they're working with their greatest defilement. And you've heard of that. They work on the greatest defilements first. If you don't know what it is, come and talk to me and I'll point it out to you. Or I might say, you need to find that out. Some of you already know. Some of you know because I've told you, and some of you know because you're way ahead of me.
I guess my question about natural hierarchy is that hierarchy to me implies that there's somebody in charge at the top who's like disseminating.
Oh yeah, you mean like those being in charge of the roots?
Yeah, exactly.
One big leaf off to one side is running the whole show. Yeah, I'm being silly, but I'm just saying you don't need a central authority, but you may need a central area where the communication is moving in such a way that there can be communication, cooperation, collaboration. I think Trungpa Rinpoche was very good at communication, cooperation, collaboration, but not. Let's say he was still working with all of the social stuff that he had to deal with because he was born in a medieval country, and so he was brought up because in those days they felt like they had to kick the daylights out of those young monks to get them to. If they found somebody that was a little outrageous, which I'm sure he was, they had to beat him up quite a bit. At least if you read Born in Tibet, quite a bit of that was happening. He had very strong parental kind of discipline coming from monks from the age of 4 on, I think. So there's a natural tendency to look for who's the boss, who's running the show, who's in charge. And that being in charge situation needs to be there, but it needs to be there with some kind of understanding of the interdependence of operating out of dependent origination, not out of trying to be the head cheese or the abbot or the roshi or the sadguru. It's not that we shouldn't use those forms. Some people need to use those and should. I'm not against any of that. But it needs to happen out of the awareness rather than out of our thought process around it, which there again, we don't want to throw our thought process out. It just needs to be tree bark instead of some big leaf on one side that runs everything. Kind of a dumb metaphor. But,
so
yes.
Do observing the forms in the context of the Zen to observe the natural forms that arise spontaneously between two individuals bowing?
That's part of the idea there. And also, but there has to be a lot of wall gazing happening. From my experience of looking at my own and also talking to people about what's happening in their minds, since I was trained in 1978 to do that formally. I'm not going to include sitting on the teeter-totter in the 6th grade and counseling my friend about his girlfriend, even though that's where it started. We have to stop. Onya is the authority here for 30 more seconds. And so
We can dedicate to Meredith.
we can dedicate them. And thank you for your questions. Very good. It really helps my original idea about the forums. It helps us all go deeper into that. There's a lot of room there. I could give another talk called number 2, and we could do this some more, because it's an important area that people misunderstand. And this is the way the misunderstanding looks. The understanding is you're just receiving. You need no conclusions. Right and wrong are extra. You don't need that. You won't if you're functioning with forms around me, I will, insofar as I can, if you've talked to me very much, you'll find that I include whatever you do, including leaving the whole mandala and monastery and never seeing me again. I may not like it, but that's my personal, I still have personal feelings about stuff, but also out of respect for you, respect for the forms that are maybe taking away your wisdom mind or covering it up. Or maybe the fear you're going through is intense. I can't do it for you, so I don't want to make life miserable for you. So it may not be your time to sit down and put your nose against a grindstone and wear your nose off. Sometimes it feels that way to practice. So, can we have someone tell me what this is? Oh, sorry.
Penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Sokuzan, the 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect us with the Bodhi Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering.